Hello, welcome back. Um, I hope your time away has been wonderful and beautiful and kind, like all the things you can find in in an Atlantis movie. If you haven't seen Disney's Atlantis, please go watch it. It's my favorite Disney movie. Um, it's just wonderful, visually beautiful, culturally, or within the movie, culturally, it's just amazing all the things. In my opinion, it's the very first feminist Disney movie. Um, so yeah, so all of the things. Anywho, let's go ahead and get started. Before I start any of the things for today, I really want to uh, say that I am so incredibly impressed by you all. Your your responses to all the things are so amazing. Goodness gracious. I'm thinking to myself, like, if I can't even imagine, rather, being as thoughtful as you all are to writing at your age. Goodness gracious. Just astounding, astute observations about, like, the work that is just beautiful. And, things that I've never thought about before. Not to say that, like, I would have thought all the thoughts, but what I mean by that is you all are pushing me to places of myself that I haven't even thought to go. Just incredible. You should be so proud of yourself for being able to think about the work in these wonderfully interesting and brilliant ways. I am so jealous of you. Goodness gracious, if you're where you are now, I can only imagine where you're already in my age. Um, just brava. Now, it occurred to me that I think in my getting to know you, or one of my checklist pages, that I said that my getting to know you video was in my files, but I think that I placed that somewhere wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and do it now. And I know that I am late. It is what is it, day 4? But later is better than never, right? So my name is Matthew B. Kelly. I go by Matthew or whatever, or Matt. I don't, people ask me all the time, is it Matthew or Matt? Which one do you prefer? I'm like, I actually don't even hear my name. What I hear is someone calling me. And so I don't know if my friends call me Matthew or Matt. I just know that, like, a name is spoken and my attention is gathered. My pronouns are he, him. I'm from Atlanta, born and raised. I grew, born in Atlanta, raised in Atlanta, went to college in Atlanta, went to Morehouse College. If you don't know what Morehouse College is, it's an all-male HBCU. HBCU, if you don't know what that is a historically black college university. While HBCUs are, by the vast majority, are black students, they also have we're also pretty diverse in ethnic backgrounds, which means that there are white students that go there. There are Latinx students that go there. There are white Latinx students that go there, and Afro-Latino students that go there, Mestizo students that go there. And there are students from the Middle East and all around the world. We're international schools. Now, what HBCU does mean is that HBCUs were started during the Reconstruction time in American history. And Reconstruction time, for those of us that don't know, is a time immediately after slavery. So immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and schools were started specifically to educate the black citizenry. So Morehouse was started in 1867 in Augusta, and then moved to Atlanta in 1885. I know a lot of history about Morehouse. That's besides the point. That's where I'm from. I taught in Atlanta after I graduated for a few years, and then after I left teaching, I came to Iowa, which is where I am now. Things that I've read, interesting things that I've read. I'm in the middle of a deep dive of Edith Wharton, and she's so wonderfully messy, and I love the writing, but she's so rich and messy, and it's everything. Also, Henry James. I just finished reading a bunch of Henry James. Also, he too is so wonderfully rich and messy, and I love everything about it. Goodness gracious. and their sentences are wonderfully convoluted and expansive, or at least Henry James's are. And I've been really enjoying getting into that. Edith Wharton is like a beautiful plot master, and so I'm really, really enjoying reading her. A fun fact during quarantine, I got a cat. So you met Raina, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, I can't remember. But she has been with me since the beginning of April, I think. And she has already made my life so very, very wonderful. I love her so very much. It makes me so happy to have her in my life. Now, that is who I am. Welcome to the class for day 4. Now, moving into our work for today. Today we're talking about Eros. Eros is love between the sexes, which is right. So there's like a boundary right there, or rather a bias right there that already exists. Tell me how you feel about that. And so generally when we talk about these things, we're talking about romantic love. And romantic love is, when I say romantic love, I mean like between two people who are romantically interested in each other, which is different from our other types of love, right? And so throwing away the fact that this is that love between the sexes is heteronormative and obviously homophobic, right? And transphobic in these particular ways. Let's investigate and move into and expand it right into what we understand now, the reality of romantic love to be able to exist as. So, what do you think? What makes it different from all the other loves? What makes it similar to all these other loves? How can it show the complexity of the human? How does it show the complexity of the human experience? Oftentimes, actually, the vast majority of media in terms of relationships is actually mostly concerned with Eros, right? Which I think is to the detriment of our conceptions of love and what we call the hierarchy of loves, right? Because people think to themselves they are not complete until they have a fulfilling Eros, right? Even if they have a fulfilling philia, or rather, if they have a philia that they could cultivate that can be fulfilling, if they have an agape that can be fulfilling, if they have if they have a storge that can fulfill them, those things don't particularly matter. What matters is the cultivation of Eros, which is unfortunate because all these other loves can be so very fulfilling, and when we place the onus on Eros to complete us, to be our salvation, I think it takes away from our ability to love fully and wholly and completely. Now, with that being said, let's move into our stories. Today we read Pat and Sam, which I think is a really cool story. It's very, very interesting. There's the relationship between these two people who come together, partly out of love, and partly out of necessity. And I think what's interesting about Eros in this particular way is that we see actually now, we're beginning to see the utility of love, the utility of the Eros relationship. I'm trying to stay away from the use of the term erotic because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And so I'm solely using the term Eros love, right, or Eros relationship. And stretching that away and moving that away from the uses of the erotic, which we're going to be reading about with Audre Lorde next week. Spoiler alert. So when I say the utility of love, I mean I'm asking what do Pat and Sam use love to give them, right? How do they use their relationship to come to a place that they want? For example, right, we see Pat, wanting a relationship partly to give a father to her children. And so the Eros ends up not being a thing to aspire to or the end, but it becomes a means to a particular end, right? And so, what ways does Sam use this relationship? Does he use this relationship? Do you think that Pat uses this relationship? Do you think these relationships have utility that end up giving them a particular end that is not inherently the love that they would share? How can we? How do the narrators, or rather, how do the characters leverage Eros for what they want? And when I say that, we've already, I think we can establish that they use the particular things. Now the question is, how do they use these things? How do they do these particular things? What actions are they taking to engage with this particular type of love? And my question is, does it taint the relationship? The fact that one can recognize utility and one can use utility, right? Because when I think about people like you took advantage of me or you used me, is something that I can imagine someone saying if Sam were to read Pat's story, Pat would be Sam might say, "You used me," right? Do you think that she used him? Do you think that he used her? Do you think that it is okay? And when I say okay, I mean, do you think it's beneficial, or do you think it's neutral? Do you think it's harmful that they use each other? That we, and that people use each other in these particular ways to get a thing that they might not have had before the relationship. Now, moving away from that, I want to talk about two craft things with this piece. The first is point of view. And so when I say point of view, I know in your high school classes, or in probably middle school too, point of view probably was given to you in terms of the three types of point of view. First, which is I, me, we, collective, is that's first person point of view. Second person is you, them, you all, right? That can be collective. And the third person is he, she, they, them, you all, y'all. I'm from the South. And so on and so forth. But when I talk about point of view, I'm more interested in which life do we follow. And what I mean by that is point of view is not just through which lens, or through, he, she, they, them, you, me, I, we. But point of view is who is telling the story and why is it being told. And what I mean by that is you should notice in the piece that there's a shifting back and forth, right? When I say shifting back and forth, is that in one story, we end up having access to the thoughts of Pat, right? And then once we shift to another number, we end up having the thoughts and backstory to Sam, right? And this point of view shift, right, when we go one person to the next person to the next person, even though all of it is told in third person, right? Each of it is told in third person, but we get Pat's thoughts. We get Pat's fears and scares and histories. And then we shift and we get Sam's fears and hopes and histories, right? And so my question is, why do we do that, right? What utility does it give to the narrative to shift back and forth like that? Why don't we just stay in Pat's story? Why don't we just stay in Sam's story? Why not blend those two things together, right? So we get Pat solely in section 1, we get Sam solely in section 2, Pat solely in section 3, and so on and so forth. Why don't we get Pat and Sam in 1, Pat and Sam in 2, Pat and Sam in 3? Why don't we do that? Do you think it benefited the story that we had the separation as we do? Do you think it was deleterious to the story that we had that separation? What are some ways in which the story can become more of itself, do you think, within this particular framework? Sorry, cat's doing tricks on the window. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is time. time in the piece, right? So first, inside the stories, as I said, within the POVs, we get people's presence, and then we move back into histories, and so we have this toggling back and forth between where the characters are now, and then where the characters are in history. And so, like, Pat, her story. We have the children, and then we move back into when she was with a partner, and sometimes things end up being later. So we come to earlier moments later in the story. So, and then, and so on and so forth. How did that work for you? How did the toggling of time function in this story? And did you appreciate that function? Do you think that it took away from the narrative that we went back and forth? What you should notice. What are some of the things that you notice with regards to time? One of the things I noticed is that each of the points in history start at different times for Pat and Sam. So Sam, Pat, we get her and her partner, which started at one point. But then we also, for Sam, we get him in roommates with someone else. And I don't know when those two match up. What I do know is that eventually those two times converge. Right, so maybe it was something like this, and then it became bloop, and now they're on dates, and then those stories begin to bleed into each other. But again, because of point of view, they end up blurring into different times. So I thought it was very interesting. Second thing that I want to talk about with time did you all notice anything on page 1, on like the second paragraph? Let me point it out. You probably did notice it, but I'm going to read it because I think it's very, very interesting. Page 1, the second paragraph. It was a cold October night in 1974. They smoked back then. Everybody did. This was before Pat's 2 children became Sam's, and before there were 3 children, before they grounded the oldest when Pat found a pack of Newports in her room. By then, they would have forgotten their own youth, or rather, they would hold their children to higher standards. The children would be confident and happy. They'd feel entitled to happiness. And for that, Pat and Sam would resent them. We, at the very beginning, we get the end of their story, or of this story. We know that they get together. We know that Pat's children become Sam's children. We know they have another child. We know that they're still living together because they ground that child. So what's the point then of telling this whole story, right? We already know the end, right? So using our Harry Potter references that I started last time, we know that Harry Potter kills Voldemort. We know that his friends survive, right? So like, why tell the story if you already know from the beginning they gonna live? Voldemort gonna die, they gonna live. Is there any point? What's the difference between that story, right, Harry Potter story, and why they didn't tell us at the very beginning what will happen in the end, and this story where we know from jump that they will end up together, that they will be seemingly maybe not happy together, right? Or are they happy together? I don't know. What is even marriage? What even is marriage? Is what I think this piece is trying to, partly interrogate. What is the utility in telling us the end of this particular story at the very beginning? What do we gain? What do we lose? Is it advantageous for this story, or is it deleterious? Moving along. Into our poem. This poem is so very beautiful, I think. It's such a gorgeous poem. It's filled with beautiful lines and incredible images. And we're going to come back to the lines because I think they're so chock full of incredible meaning. And we have the beauty of Eros, but then we have the devastation of Eros hidden. So we have one wanting to engage with it, one possibly wanting to engage fully, and the other one being hidden. And what, maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't. This is a poem about 2 gay men. If you didn't notice that, read it again and see what you find, see what things jumped out to you. And so what's interesting about this is that the poem it doesn't seem to be interested in telling you or saying outright that these are homosexual men. What does that mean? What I'm looking at it as, or one of the things I'm taking away from the fact that it's not interested, is that we're asked to interrogate why, if we thought these were two straight people, why, right? How does one center immediately the straight heteronormative gaze onto this homosexual poem, this poem that is about two homosexual men? Then what's interesting about this is that the narrative of this poem is so unconcerned about what straightness is interested in that it immediately falls into itself. It doesn't have to announce itself. It's like, if a cat walked into a room and says, "Hey, I'm a cat," right? The cat won't do that. The cat walks into the room and it's a cat. It goes around being a cat. It's not interested in telling you every 5 seconds, "Hey, I'm a cat. I'm a cat over here. I'm a cat over there," right? When one is centering themselves, they maneuver around the space, around the world, unconcerned about what labels are thrust upon it, and more concerned about the experience that it's having, right? And so yeah, so what does it mean to you, right? That maybe this poem for you started out, or what you thought it was about a heterosexual couple, but it was actually about a homosexual couple. What things might that interrogate internally for you? Now, moving into craft, I want to talk about something called enjambment. And when I say enjambment, if you don't know what that is what we call line breaks in poetry. And so what you'll notice in the poem is, let me pull up the poem actually here. What we'll notice is that some lines in poetry end with with a punctuation mark, and some lines of poetry will shift in the middle of a sentence. For example, the second line of the poem, "You fell asleep that way, nude, and capsized by our wine, our bump and grind shenanigans. Blame it on whatever you like. My bed welcomes." Right, and so let's take a look at some of the enjambment. So one of the things that I've learned about enjambment, that I've been told about enjambment, the way to look at it is that a poem is like, oh Lord Jesus, y'all don't even have CDs no more. Goodness gracious. Or I don't know if y'all have CDs or records, child. But y'all know what an album is. And so a poem is like a whole album, right? So the whole album will tell a story, a complete story. But each song in that, right, is something that can stand alone, right? You have singles. And so the song should be able to stand alone when you pull it out. And then when you place it in the larger context of the album, that it interacts with the things around it, and it tells a whole story. But when you pull it out, again, it can stand on its own. For example, I'm looking at the second stanza. Excuse me. I want us to look at that last line. So I'm going to read the whole stanza, starting at "Blame it. Blame it on whatever you like. My bed welcomes whomever you decide to be. Thug, mistress, poinsettia, John Doe, in the alcove of my dreams. You can quote verbatim an entire album, and so on and so forth." So there, right? So this is where one of those places where the poem is concerned about, who a man can be, particularly a black man. Philip B. Williams is a black queer man who won the Whiting Award for his collection, and the Kate Tufts Award for this particular collection. Just a brilliant poet. So it says, "Whomever you decide to be," right? So whomever you decide to be, and then they begin to list it. And so "Thug Mistress" is the first complete thought. What's really brilliant about this particular enjambment is that not only does it separate in the middle of a sentence, but it separates in the middle of a word. Who even? Goodness. So we see "whomever you decide to be," thug - mistress. So we get not only the first thing that you get to decide to be is a thug mistress, right? And so when you think about thug, right, I one of the things that is connoted with thug is person, right? So one at the very least one man, right? So a thug is a man generally, right? Or when one thinks about connotations, who's connoted to be a thug, right? More specifically, a black man. So we get thug, right? So black man, and then thug mistress, right? So a black man woman, right? Mistress woman, and so we not only do we get the thug mistress, which is one, but we get two in one because it separates. We get a thug, right? In the first line separates into a thug mistress. So the gay man, gets to be a black man, but also gets to be effeminate, right? Which says, I am allowing whomever you decide to be. These things that end up actually being contradictory, or maybe seemingly contradictory. So thug and a mistress, right? These two things don't necessarily get to exist in each other, but they get to exist in one word, but then they also get to exist on two separate lines, which is brilliant. Another form of enjambment. I'm moving down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting with the first line. So I'm going to go up one. It says, they mince syllables as you call me yours. You don't like me, but you still invite me to your home when your homies aren't near. Now, right? So when we take a look at this particular form of enjambment, in the first line, in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the fifth stanza, as you call me yours, period. That's the end of that sentence. You don't. But let's remove that period. Let's remove that period as the supposed end of a thought, and let's just make it a breath, a space, right? As you call me yours, you don't. Think about that. As you call me yours, but you don't call me yours, because he's being hidden. So we get that one thought right there. As you call me yours, you don't. Right? Even though you don't is about you don't like me, but still invite me to. That's a whole other sentence. But because of enjambment, we can push together the end of a sentence with the beginning of one and make one complete thought just with that. Right? And so that's the brilliance of enjambment. I'm gonna move last one because I just love these. Like there's so much, like I was saying before, there's so much meaning in these particular things. Let's move to the last stanza of the poem. Starting with the first line. Outside, so we're going to actually go back 2 stanzas because that's where the sentence begins. The sickle moon turns the sky into a man's mouth slapped sideways to keep him from spilling what no one would understand. You call me God when it gets good, though I do not exist to you outside this room. Be yourself or no one else. Here, your do-rag is camouflage patterned and stuffed into my mouth. Let's look at the first line of that one. Outside this room, be yourself or no one else. Again, let's take out that period as the supposed end of a thought and use it more as a pause. Outside this room, let's imagine it's the beginning of a sentence. Outside of this room, let's imagine this is a directive. Outside of this room, be yourself or no one else. That's a thought. Maybe it's pleading. It sounds pleading to me. Please, outside of this room, be yourself or no one else. Stop hiding. Stop trying to be what people expect you to be. Just be yourself or no one else, right? Outside of this room, because that's where the speaker of the poem is being denied, right? Inside the room, they can be lovers. They have Eros. Outside of the room, I don't know you, right? So the speaker of the poem it sounds to me like they're pleading with their lover. Please, outside this room, be yourself for no one else. Let's move into that second line. Here, right? Your do-rag is camouflage patterned, right? And again, that here is a part of another sentence. Your do-rag is another one. But let's remove that period as a stop of a thought and make it a pause. Here. Your do-rag is camouflage pattern. Where are we? In a room. Here. Your do-rag is camouflage patterned. Let's think about what camouflage does. It camouflages. It hides. It blends in. it makes one something else. So here, your do-rag is camouflage patterned. Here, it hides. Here, what you wear hides you. Here, with me, your do-rag is camouflage patterned and stuffed into my mouth. Here, your do-rag, the thing that hides you, right? The thing that hides you is stuffed into my mouth. Such brilliance, goodness gracious. That's enjambment, and so as we maneuver through this class, so there are wonderful forms of enjambment in the poems before, but I wanted to call it out particularly here because these are some of my favorite enjambments in all of poetry, and all the poems that I've read. Now, moving to what we were discussing, or just the three types of poems. What type of poem do you think this one is? Again, we have narrative, persona, and lyric. Let's see. What do you think? 5. What do you think? I think, when I say I think that this is maybe a lyric poem. It bleeds, right? So like it is, somehow it is both narrative, but it doesn't particularly, I don't know if it tells a story that's bound by time, though space is bound by time. And so it says here, as we said before, "Darling, the moon did not disrobe you, you fell asleep that way," as if the speaker is talking to their lover after they wake up. But time falls away in this way. Time falls away, and it moves into more about what it means to be a secret, loving in secret. So I'm not entirely sure. There's a possibility that this is also a persona poem. That this can be in the voice of someone that the speaker or that the writer is imagining themselves to be. I don't know. This is the beauty of poetry, that it can be undefinable in its totality. So we can define enjambment, we can define rhythm and music and pace and speed and all the things, but then we're asked to say what type of poem this is, and it's just like, good question. What kind of poem is this? Because the poem is not concerned with being defined. Raina is not concerned with being defined. She's like, you can call me a cat. Wait, there's a song, cat, hat in French, chapeau. In Spanish, el gato en a sombrero. He's a cat in a hat. If you haven't seen the cartoon Cat in the Hat, the old one, you should watch it. It's cute. Anywho, I'm not entirely sure what this can be defined as. I'm saying lyric, but I'm also saying it could possibly be an amalgamation of all the things. Now, to today's assignment. Yesterday you used your 3 times as much information to create wants and fears about your character. Now, today we're going to be talking about internal conflict. Yay, right? Conflict. We get some conflict. Tension, right? And so when we are talking about internal conflicts, I mean the fights that are going on within oneself. These are the psychological things within artworks that end up giving us, that afford epiphanies, that afford growth, that afford the struggle with oneself. When we think about, it's easy to think about, a person fighting, a man fighting a bull, right? But the fights become more complex when the man is fighting the bull inside himself. Who is the bull? What does that look like? Does it have to be a bull? Does the bull actually, when the thing is inside oneself, it can transform. A bull is always a bull outside, right? But if I think a thing is a bull inside, and then I go to therapy and I logic my way into it being a mouse, that's interesting. That's complicated. Maybe I fear mice more than I fear bulls, right? Now, the reason that we go from wants and fears to internal conflicts is because when a person can articulate, when a person can figure out what they want and what they fear, those things at many points in our lives contradict each other, right? maybe I want to eat a fancy dinner. Maybe I want to eat um, oranges, but I don't like the smell. But I'm allergic, right? That creates a conflict. I don't. That's not a very good one. Let's use our examples for today. I was trying to create some examples and go to the ones for today. I'm just going to use them for today. For Pat and Sam, I'm thinking about Pat in particular. Pat wants to be happy, um, and Pat wants a father for her children. Pat fears being alone, right? And these things on the surface might not seem to be contradictory, but the conflict comes when Pat says, I want a father for my children, which she could find in Sam, right? But Pat also wants to be happy, which you'll notice over the course of the story is that maybe she's not always the happiest with Sam. So I want to be happy, but this man doesn't make me happy. But I want a father for my children, which he could be. That there's an internal conflict. Because now her things, the wants are rubbing against each other. She also fears being alone. So now it's a struggle, right? So like that fear of being alone pushes with that wanting to have a father for her children, right? But what's also interesting is that when she says, I don't want to be alone, but maybe she will be alone inside that future marriage. I don't know. And so these are the conflicts that we have to tease out. Which of those wants are in conflict with each other? Write that down, right? Think about the ways that your wants and fears are going to rub up against each other. Moving on to our poem, The Lover, right? The lover is a man who likes men. He loves men, right? So he wants to sleep with that partner because he doesn't, obviously, right? So he wants to sleep with the speaker of the poem. He also wants to still portray himself as heterosexual, right? He wants to love on his lover, but he fears being laughed at, right? He fears being ostracized. He fears being outed for loving men. I'm not saying gay or homosexual because one can like to sleep with men and women, or one can like to sleep with non-binary folks, right? Just because one does something with the same gender does not make that exclusive to their experience. So that's why I'm fumbling up a little bit. But yeah, so he wants to be with that partner. He wants to be with that lover. He doesn't want to be ostracized for wanting to be with that lover. Internal conflict. We get conflict. We get tension. Tension is where humanity figures itself out or tries to figure itself out. Tension and conflict is where humanity can do things or think about things, right? If you ain't got no tension, you're not forced to think, right? You got to rub up iron sharpens iron. Well, no, I don't want to say that. That's not very good one. But we're forced to think when we come up against a problem, right? And fiction is concerned with tension, right? Or excuse me, art is concerned with tension, right? What's the point of it if there's no tension? Even the things that like are trying to be easy breezy beautiful, the tension is the world around them. Right? So like if I like pastoral poetry, which is poetry about like prairies and wide open spaces. The reason that the tension in pastoral poetry comes from the fact that around them there is like there's all this land and beauty and like nature around us. But like you step too far out of here, there might be an industrial world, or there might be tension in somebody's house. Or I'm writing pastoral poetry because like my waking life is like crazy, There's always tension. Art loves tension. Art is, I think, most in touch with humanity when there is tension. And one of the ways that one can find tension is within the self, which is where we find internal conflict. So I want you all in your assignment to come up with some of the internal conflict that would exist within your character, right? I want you to list at least. You should have a lot of dynamics about your character from the 3 times. You should have. My hope is that you have at least about 10 wants or fears. So try to come up with 5 forms of internal conflict that exist within your character. Stretch yourself, really, really stretch, right? And think about the ways that this person is interacting with the world, with their history, to come up with those ways that they're fighting against their own intentions, their own wants, their own fears, right? Woman versus woman versus the woman inside herself, which I think is very, very interesting. Now, that is all I have for today. All right, I shall talk to you all later. I love you all. Rest easy. Okay? Bye-bye.